Every year, millions of people spend hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars upgrading devices they already own. They wait in long lines, defend the company online, and stay loyal for decades, even when cheaper alternatives exist that do almost the same thing. So the real question is not what Apple makes, but what Apple makes people feel. Because somewhere along the way, Apple stopped being a technology company and started becoming an identity. Apple Inc. was founded in 1976 in a small garage in California. At the time, it wasn't a global company. It wasn't even a famous idea. It was just two young builders, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, trying to create something different from the machines that existed in the world. Computers back then were not personal. They were complex, expensive, and made for corporations, not people. But Apple had a different vision. They wanted to put computing power into the hands of ordinary individuals, not engineers, not companies, people. Their first creation, the Apple I, was simple, hand-built, limited, almost experimental, but it carried one powerful idea, that technology could feel human. A year later, they introduced the Apple II, one of the first successful personal computers ever made. And for the first time, computers started leaving offices and entering homes. But at this stage, Apple was still just an idea. The real transformation had not happened yet. But everything changed when one decision inside Apple shifted its entire future. As the company grew, it began to lose direction. Competition increased, products became inconsistent, and Apple slowly started losing its identity in the tech world. By the mid-1990s, Apple was no longer leading the industry. It was struggling to survive in it. And then, something almost unthinkable happened. In 1997, Steve Jobs returned to the company he had once helped create. But he didn't return to a successful empire. He returned to a company on the edge of collapse. Apple was losing billions. Its products were scattered, and its future was uncertain. Most companies at that point would have focused only on survival, cutting costs, fixing hardware, competing on price. But Steve Jobs did something different. He didn't ask, "What should we build?" He asked, "What should Apple become?" And that question changed everything. Instead of trying to match competitors, Apple began to simplify, reduce, refocus, remove anything that didn't matter. The goal was no longer to make more products, but to make meaningful ones. This shift led to a new philosophy inside Apple. Simplicity was not just design, it was strategy. And slowly, Apple began its transformation from a struggling computer company into something much more powerful, a brand that didn't just sell technology, but sold vision.
Subscribe for more business documentaries.
But the real impact of Apple's transformation was not in technology. It was in human behavior. Because Apple didn't just build products, it built a psychological system. People don't simply buy Apple devices, they enter an ecosystem. And once they enter, they rarely leave. Not because they are forced, but because everything starts to feel connected. The iPhone connects to the Mac connects to the iPad connects to the Apple Watch. Everything works together seamlessly, effortlessly, invisibly, and over time, that simplicity becomes powerful because the human brain prefers what feels easy, what feels familiar, what feels stable. But Apple didn't stop at convenience. It created identity. Owning an Apple product is not just a functional choice anymore. It is a a signal of taste, simplicity, status, belonging. And once identity is involved, logic becomes weaker. People stop asking, is this the best option? And start asking, does this feel like me? Even the design reinforces this psychology. Clean surfaces, minimal interfaces, no distractions. Everything is built to feel calm, controlled, premium. And the more someone uses Apple products, the more they become part of that environment. Not just using the system, but living inside it. And that is where loyalty is born. Not through advertising, not through persuasion, but through habit, identity, and emotional comfort. Apple didn't just create customers, it created a way of life. Once Apple mastered the psychology of simplicity and identity, its growth began to accelerate across the world. What started as a computer company became a global ecosystem. The iPhone changed everything. It wasn't just a phone, it became the center of modern digital life. Communication, entertainment, work, identity, all inside a single device. And once that device spread across countries, Apple's influence expanded with it. Apple stores began appearing in major cities around the world, not just as retail spaces, but as carefully designed experiences. Glass walls, open spaces, minimal design, everything reinforcing the same message. Simplicity equals premium. By doing this, Apple didn't just sell products in different countries. It exported a lifestyle, a shared global standard of what modern technology should feel like. And as more people entered the ecosystem, the network became stronger. Every new user made the system more valuable. Every new device reinforced the same loop of connection. iPhone sales fueled services. Services strengthened loyalty. Loyalty drove upgrades. And the cycle continued. Over time, Apple stopped being just a technology company. It became one of the most powerful ecosystems in the world. A system that didn't just sit inside markets, but shaped them. And by the time Apple reached hundreds of millions of users worldwide, it wasn't competing anymore. It was defining the standard.
Subscribe for more business documentaries.
But when a system becomes this powerful, it also begins to raise questions. Because Apple's greatest strength, its ecosystem, is also its biggest criticism. Many users argue that once you enter Apple's world, leaving becomes difficult. Not because it is impossible, but because everything is designed to work better together inside the system. iMessage, AirDrop, iCloud, Mac integration all create a seamless experience that is hard to replace elsewhere. And over time, this convenience can turn into dependency. Another major criticism is pricing. Apple products are often positioned at the premium end of the market. For some people, this represents quality and design. For others, it represents exclusion, a divide between those who can access the ecosystem and those who cannot. There have also been ongoing debates around repairability and control. Critics argue that Apple's tightly controlled system limits customization and third-party repair options, reinforcing a closed environment. Supporters, however, say this is exactly what makes the experience stable, secure, and consistent. And this is where Apple becomes more than a company. It becomes a debate between freedom and simplicity, between openness and control, between flexibility and perfection. But despite all criticism, none of it has significantly slowed Apple's global dominance. Because for millions of users, the experience still feels worth it, and the ecosystem remains deeply integrated into everyday life. And in the end, Apple is no longer just a product people use. It has become something much bigger, a system woven into daily life, a company that sits inside communication, work, entertainment, and identity itself. From a small garage in 1976 to one of the most valuable companies in the world. Apple's journey was never just about technology. It was about understanding human behavior, understanding what people want, what they value, and what they become attached to over time. Because Apple didn't just build devices, it built experiences that feel familiar, simple, and personal. And once something becomes part of how people live every day, it stops being a choice, becomes a habit, and sometimes even part of identity. In the end, Apple's real success was not in creating products people buy, but in creating a world people stay inside.
Thanks for watching Billion Arc.